Yep.
So Adam, in that space, regulation's very heavy in the finance sector, right?
Very much so.
To protect things.
I can talk quite a lot about regulation. So actually, even before Westpac, when I was at IBM, I had the pleasure of rolling out Sarbanes-Oxley across Asia Pac. So I don't know if you guys know what the hell SOX is. I pity you if you do. We can go have a drink later and talk about the war stories. But give you a real story. The first one that we had to roll it out for was Japan. And part of SOX's mandate is that everything has to be in English. So you can imagine rolling into Japan and telling them to air all their dirty laundry, all in English, so that the Americans know exactly what's happening. So it's always good fun. But just to, not to sort of contradict what was discussed there, but things like SOX with the arbitrators that come in, etc. It's not just fines and jobs. Like with SOX, my CFO, so I reported to the Asia Pac CFO at the time. I went around and looked at the top 10 clients that IBM had, and these are like $2 billion contracts. And he was on edge because literally he would go to jail if we were cooking the books, so to speak. And it could be 15 rungs down the ladder, but he was the guy that would go into jail. So you're not talking, like, yes, you're talking houses and all that, but you're talking, these guys aren't going in not for like 2 years, 3 years. Like these guys, okay, they're going in as white collar jail. It's not, death row, but they're going in for 15, 20 years for company fraud in some sort of fashion. If you fast forward now into my current role, most of the issues that we come up with for, I throw the term of invention and innovation into different sort of spectrums. Like if I look at us as a bank, we tend to innovate more than invent. However, having said that, we were the first guys in the world to go out with fingerprint login for our online banking on our mobile phones. So in some regards, we do invent where we think we can actually be first to market. But most of the time, it's APRA that will come in, so the 4-letter acronym in the bank. And if this goes out to APRA, we love you guys. It's great. But APRA is, in my opinion, APRA's point of view of digital and how it applies to the bank needs to come a couple of levels up. They're still applying old mentality to us, and so it's making it quite restrictive for what we can and can't do, particularly in the digital space. So we have sort of handcuffs in some regard applied to us, which I'm hoping to get alleviated eventually. But most of the time legislation comes in and knocks us one on the head. But having said that, we do a pretty good job of doing it to ourselves.
Can I make one last point? Sorry,
sure.
I don't want to dominate this.
No,
but
by all means.
Good risk versus bad risk. I mean, I'd say a startup is good risk.
Yes.
Because if you're going to lose your house, you will do anything to invent a new product or sell to a different market or do something in order to survive. If you're going to go to jail, you're unlikely to take those steps and be as innovative as you otherwise would do in order not to go to jail.
Correct. Exactly. And I think Dale, you and I, or Mark, Dale, we're talking about the different levels of skin in the game.
Yeah.
With a startup versus a corporate. With a corporate, you're literally all in.
Yeah.
Sorry, not with a corporate. With a startup, you're literally all in. Sorry, wrong way. And with a large enterprise, there's a varying degree of how much skin they've got in the game. And to Dale's point, how far down the pecking order they are depends on what sort of level of skin they have in the game. Yeah. So you get fluctuating experiences of, the approach they take to quality, what they're willing to do from that sort of perspective as well with risk. So, yes.
So in the marketplace, I've seen a lot of growth around, Adam, what you talked about, that experimentation culture coming out of like lean startup, where even in large organisations, that real focus now on speed, agility, iteration. So the question is, can we innovate through this, but at the same time navigate the sort of quality aspects and the risk aspects? Does that work in large enterprises' favour to look at those aspects of how startups innovate?
Yeah. So the irony is, so we just re-rolled out St. George Banking Group, so the three websites for St. George Bank of Melbourne and Bank SA. So they now sit on Adobe, they sit on Amazon. We've implemented a thing called CI/CD. I won't go into the details of that, but a lot of what we've implemented through, I guess, innovation within the bank, so to speak, has meant that the quality of what we've done's gone up. The speed's actually gone up as well. So it's kind of, the correlation in the bank was speed goes up, quality went down. Whereas we've actually worked out that not necessarily. You might be just testing for the sake of testing. So we've actually found that by having the agile mentality in our delivery teams, particularly around our websites, it's allowing our guys to actually be closer to the ground and closer, I guess, to the concept of a startup. They're actually got their own skin in the game. They're actually driving the product that they're working on. they're actually getting the risk and reward approach within the bank. So there's not some executive 4 levels up that's saying you shall do this. They're actually self-governing and self-directing. And by virtue of that, the last sort of 6 or 7 sprints, we've almost been doubling sprint to sprint on what we're getting out, and quality has been improving, and our defects have actually been reducing. So for us internally at the moment, it's been a great story.
Yeah. Similar experiences from the other?
Look, I think that the luxury that a large corporate has is actually it can afford to get more wrong, and so it can behave in ways where you can push it a little bit closer to the envelope and say, look, we're going to, we might try for higher velocity than we might otherwise do, because I can pull 3 people in to help me with testing if I need to. Whereas in a startup, unless you've got 99 interns ready to flood you with people, which I don't know whether you should do or not, but there's a different balance there. So I think that in a startup you tend to take more calculated risks. There's more care taken in the nature of the risks that you take. And if you like, in a larger corporate, there can be almost a little less care, because there's a little less, as Adam said, a little less personal investment in some of those decisions. But the freedom to be wrong is better in a large corporate than it is in a startup. Because if you're wrong in a startup, it could be the end of you. Whereas if, at Telstra, if I was wrong, it was like, oh, well, I'll do that again. And, just spend a bit more money. And in fact, that is usually how most projects go wrong and then come good, is they just get money thrown at them until they come good. That's the advantage. It's a cash flow problem in a smaller business. You're out of business.
Yeah.
I just want to probably add that the risk profile can change depending on what you're working on. So if it's a large enterprise, and if it's a bank and it's something that's core to the bank's offering to its consumers, it's probably not your first place you're going to do risky, innovation. If you're a media organisation and there's an advertiser who wants to do something a bit novel and new and innovative, it's probably a good space to maybe win that particular ad dollar, to step out, do something a bit innovative. If it doesn't work, well, you're going to have learned from the experience. So the risk profiles for enterprises, I think, can vary a lot. And I think what we're about is encouraging those big organizations to look around and say, well, where are some of the quick wins? Where are the places that we can play in with maybe a lower risk profile, so that we can all get comfortable with doing some disruptive innovation without too much risk going on. And then from that lesson we'll learn, and let's grow into a place where we feel more and more comfortable.
Yeah. Okay. What I might do is actually switch to some questions, perhaps from the audience. So we've covered a sort of a bit of a variety of the core themes of today. So I'm quite happy to ask more questions myself, but again, there's possibly some issues you'd like addressed in the audience. No? Oh yeah, there's a question up the back there. We'll get a microphone to you.
Hi. This is a question for Ian. In that example that you used of, I think before you were talking about the lending from, was it Westpac you were talking about?
Society One.
Yeah. I mean, was the premise from Westpac's perspective about sort of getting in to eliminate an old way of doing business to sort of show that they are leaders in the space? I mean, you said they're designing the cutthroat for their own throat. I mean, could they be testing the water to say we're gonna go down this track because we want to be seen to be an innovator in that space, so that the old way will fall away and the new way will be seen as a leader in that space?
Look, it's probably easier for me to talk about this than you, because you might get in trouble. So look, my view is the reality is they're trying to make money. So the 2 guys running that fund, their primary concern is picking good investments that will be valuable in the long term. However, their investments need to be signed off by the investment committee, which would involve, I suspect, I don't know this, but will involve senior members of the bank. So Danny and Simon the investors would have found this deal, said this is a terrific deal, done all the due diligence, negotiated the term sheets, probably talked about it through the process, but that had to come back through the bank, and the bank would then at that point have realized if this works, do you realize the implications? And so that was my test. So at the point that the credit committee was going to sign off on it, the CEO probably knew about it, and I don't know whether it was Brian at the time, but there's a change of guard happening there that they were prepared to do that. Now that wouldn't have happened, Kodak didn't do that. I mean, that really is, that was a long time ago. And it's maybe worth just touching on this. I mean, like, to put some of this into context, the world is just dramatically different, and it's really technology that's driven that. I mean, 10 years ago, AWS didn't exist. There was no, cheap, large-scale cloud computing. I mean, when I look at startups nowadays, they have access to infinite computing power, really, and you only pay for it when you use it. So it just means what would have cost you, pick a number, 5 to 10 million probably to get Society 1 or possibly more off the ground as a startup. You can do it for under 50 now. And if you're smart and you've got good engineers, it's under 5. I mean, it's basically, you can build this stuff in your backyard in your spare time. So it means that, and by the way, that doesn't make it more likely that you'll be successful as a business, but it makes it easier and faster to get started, so you can risk more on the way through. So if the risk is lower, you're more likely to iterate to find the right idea. So you're seeing more startups, more good ideas, and that's really where this event, I think, and the panel came around. It's like the corporates have seen what startups are doing. So startups are born in the cloud. They don't have to worry about buying servers. And any startup that comes to me saying, I'm thinking of buying a server, it's like, come back when you've seen the light. You don't need to. Corporates are now moving that way. It's much harder for them because they've got all the legacy systems and people and processes that are making that hard. But again, the true leaders and innovators in that, Westpac, Macquarie, Suncorp, I mean, they are pretty much going all in this stuff. So it is a dramatically different environment now than it used to be. And you sort of, I mean, back to your question, Westpac want to make money. I mean, that ultimately is, they are a bank, so if they're going to cut their own throat, at least they can do it with a company that's going to be vastly valuable.
I'd like to add something to that, because I think that in that question and in the point about finding the people who'll kill you and investing in them, there's an interesting conundrum for enterprise in that I say almost without exception, because I can't actually think of an exception to this. When I've seen a large corporate try to pick a winner in startups, it's been pretty much a spectacular failure. And it's the thing that I liked about Marudi was actually it's not really about Telstra. They've sort of set it apart. I've been engaged with a couple of other corporate-style startup programs which have been about, great, we'll get some startups together and we are in industry X and we'll pick some winners that will be the disruptors in our space. They've not worked. And it comes back to that core DNA problem around the moment that the enterprise wants to get hands-on or oh, this will be the next big thing, and they almost certainly destroy it. You actually need to, and I think that this fund is probably the best way to do this, push it away from you, make the investments, but then actually let it do its thing. And at the point it's big enough that you could pick that flower and put it in a vase inside the office, great, but don't do it until then, because trying to pick a winner at startup stage, it almost certainly you will kill it.
So, yeah, on Reinventor, and I'm not exactly sure how much and what I can and can't say, but it was actually Brian's baby before Brian became group CEO. So when he was internally what we called AFS, that was all the banking brands together. So it was his pet project to get that live. So I don't see it going anywhere in the near future either. And yeah, he is very much across and invested in what's happening with each. Another one that they're doing is Neighbors? Neighbor. So we don't get much of a view internally with of the bank of what's happening in that fund. As Dale says, it's literally very arm's length. Something that I saw a lot of when I was at IBM was during the acquisition stages. They'd always acquire companies and they'd go buy Cerulean's the one that I can think of that was the best one. Oh, we're going to go buy Cerulean. They're nimble, they're agile, they're quick, they'll do this, they'll do that. They bring him in and straight away it's like, all right, so you got to follow this, you got to follow that. If you want to buy anything, this is your purchase order requisition tool you've got to use. And it'll take 3 months to get approvals, and they just end up strangling them with their own internal process. So yeah, I agree. I think the way that, and not that I've had anything to do with Reinventure, but I think the way that we're approaching Reinventure is potentially giving it the best chance to succeed.
Your comments, Ian, made me think about the government sector. You know, when we say it's all about money, for government it's perhaps different. Say in the ABC, you know, the drivers are a bit different, right, in terms of innovation and risk. So how does the public sector approach this? I mean, do they have a responsibility to the taxpayers to be equally responsible to their, as if an enterprise to its shareholders?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's an interesting space, and the ABC, you know, it's really largely about audience and what's the audience response to a new service, and that's the thing that's monitored. It's not about revenue, obviously. And there's some very interesting things that are going on wider in government. You know, there's the DTO, the Digital Transformation Office, which has been launched by Malcolm Turnbull. That really is they're taking the perspective, I think, in that of efficiency. There are so many government departments around, all trying to, you know, for example, each one has its own different way of implementing a unique user ID, so you have to log into each different service differently. And that's one, if they can crack it as government, that obviously brings a lot of efficiencies, cost savings, and it's a far more desirable outcome for everyday Australians to have a single login. That's just one example. So government are doing some really interesting things now, but they're being driven by, not by revenue, but basically cheaper, better use of taxpayers' money, and better experiences for taxpayers too.
Yep. Great. Yeah, there's a question over there. Perhaps we can get a... Oh, sorry, I've got a microphone here, and then we'll come back.
I've got a question, gentlemen. Thank you for your answers. I'm aware that Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and Steve Jobs, they were also involved in startups. Do any of you have any programs to develop startups and build a relationship between enterprise and startups to, you know, build a innovative environment?
Yeah, that's the guy on your left.
Yeah. Oh, two afterwards.
Yeah, look, I touched on it before. We do want to, it's not a formal program as yet. I mean, we have a program called Activate that supports startups, and, you know, we provide, you know, Amazon credits and engineering support and training and other guidance, but I would like to see a more formal program, or even if it's an informal, formal program where we are connecting the two. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. It's coming.
Yeah, there's I'm not sure if you can hear me on my mic. Can you hear me? Yeah. There's a series of partnerships between big business and startups that have, you know, taken place. I can, you know, recount one example over the last year, which is with the MFAA, the Mortgage Industry Association, and they worked with a series of startups to identify, well, what could really bring new advantages to our whole industry. And that process, a summary of that process, identified that actually all those independent mortgage advisors out there are faced with one big challenge, which is once they kind of got the deal across the line, is how do they actually verify all of the information? How do they get all those different documents that they need in order to satisfy all the regulations and do it in an efficient way? And it's such a kind of disparate and industry that there was no one technique to do this very successfully. So the MFAA worked with some startups that actually delivered some solutions, and now there's an app that all of their members, all of the mortgage advisors out there can just use the app to photograph different documents, get them scanned in effectively, and they use just OCR to convert them into, populate all the right fields and all the right forms, and the whole process has been made much smoother, and it's actually turned into a bit of revenue earner for the industry organization, because they clip the ticket on every app download that goes through. So the Mortgage Industry Association itself has come out stronger. All the members are much happier because they've got an efficient way to do it, and the startups involved are over the moon. So there's some great examples out there of it working really well.
I think inherent in the question you asked, because I've already, like, I no longer work at Telstra, but I spoke about Marudi, is what's happening with the ecosystem for the support of startups. So enterprise supporting startups is one way, and innovation funds and these types of things are one thing. But there also needs to be more in the ecosystem than just incubator funds and accelerator funds to help businesses get started. There needs to be the investment tier beyond that, where you can leave an accelerator and say, okay, I need to be able to get access to capital now. I've validated the concept, I've failed fast, done whatever I needed to do and iterated to get to a point that I've got 5 customers who are paying me some money and I can demonstrate that this is a viable product. So although I no longer work at Telstra, certainly one of my proudest moments there is Murudi. I think that it's almost amazing to me that it worked as well as it did, because I would say it is exactly what our industry needed to add to the ecosystem. It did not invent it. There are plenty of good accelerators, StartMate, TechBeach, a lot of people out there doing some really good work. But it added to the ecosystem, and a lot then of what Telstra's focus in and the investment that it makes in these startups is the 40,000 for 6% is actually not really the value for those startups in that program. It's a lot of the rest of the baseline that then comes, such as the ability to draw potential investors in. The ability to... I was invited to a meeting for one of the startups who was an edutech startup. I arrived about 5 minutes late. It was Department of Premier and Cabinet and Department of Education, and I came. They were being completely ignored. I walked in the room. All the guys, the government guys, were on their Blackberries. They still used Blackberries at the time. Completely ignoring the startup. I walked in. I said, "Hi, I'm from Telstra. We've invested in this company because we believe they have a future." The Blackberries went down. Their heads came up. They started looking and listening and paying attention, because it was like, there's credibility behind these people now. So it's about adding some support, some credibility, and then getting to the next phase. And we're starting to see now some capital being raised in the market, but you have to be able to leave the accelerator or the incubator process and go to that next stage where you've got money to say, I'm going to hire some staff, I'm going to actually put myself in an office, or a co-working space, but I've got outgoings, I need to support myself, I need runway. So this is one stage, but you need that next stage to be there, and we're starting to see that there. Some people are starting to raise funds. It's starting to happen in Innovation Bay and some of the stuff that Ian has commenced, and I know that his wife is starting to put together a fund. I was at a Murudi follow-on fund last night, which actually has nothing to do with Murudi. Some of the investors have gathered together and grouped together to say, we will create a portfolio fund that will invest in the Murudi companies, and that's happening through a completely third party. Now, Murudi endorses it and says, yeah, that's fine, you guys can go do that. But these are the things that are needed in the industry. We need to see money coming in to help sustain. So it's not just that first bit. Sorry, got off track.
The irony to it as well is, so we've got Reinventors as one part of the spectrum. The other for us as a bank is, I don't know, I've sat in countless workshops as you do in a large organisation. You're in a workshop or a meeting every hour. But the number of workshops that we're having on how do we actually reach out to the startup community, how do we reach out to that small medium business, particularly the small end of town, and how do we actually add value as a bank to you guys? How do we actually get you guys on board as customers? That's something that we're actually struggling with internally, trying to solve. How do we actually add value to you? How do we not squash you? Not as a customer, but as a supplier to you. Like, how do we not strangle you with everything that you've got to jump through from a hoop perspective in order to do business with us, so that we can actually open the coffers, so to speak, provide you guys with the sustenance that you need to be able to succeed. So I know there's a lot of effort on our side as well. I wouldn't say we've succeeded by any means yet, but we're actually trying to crack that nut internally, actually reaching out to you guys from a selling perspective. Like, how do we actually get a voice in the marketplace with you that's not dismissed straight away, where we're actually vying for your business as well as any of these funds, etc. Obviously, we're not probably going to be at the same early end of the spectrum, but at that level when you've proven the point and you're able to actually stand up and say, we have a business here that's ready to rock and roll. We want to expand overseas. We want to expand it nationally. We're quite keen to actually see what we can do to work in partnership with startups and small businesses around that.
There's a question over here.
Thanks for the great discussion about risk and innovation. It's a great discussion that you don't really hear anywhere else. I had a question about, I guess, some of the things you were talking about in terms of the push to change culture within large enterprise organisations through for example, agile or incremental innovation, and whether, in your experience, that does actually build the resilience of the organisation to, I guess, deal with digital disruption coming down the line? Is there actually any evidence for that, or is that just an assumption that enterprise makes that bringing in more of the sort of lean startup approach will help?
I think, yeah. Oh. You go first, Mike. Go for it.
I'm happy to talk a bit about this. We used to work together, by the way, at the ABC. So, hello, Monique. It's an interesting question. I think we'll all probably have personal views on this. My personal view is that just changing your methodology, development methodology, isn't going to offer you any protection at all. It's just going to make you turn out things in a better way. And I think organizations should carry on innovating incrementally in the way they've always done as well. I think there's a lot of great work that is done in that space. But I also think that the large organizations, to protect themselves, need to have a fast-track, disruptive innovation capacity that's not done at all in the traditional way, that's done by inviting in those startups into the right environment where they can work with that company. It's not about selecting them as much as saying, inviting them into a space where they might get access to the APIs of that company, to play with the data of that company, to ask questions about how certain business models work, how can they be involved in those, to really kind of play in that space. And we have a bit of an analogy, which is, show of hands, who's familiar with the Moreton Bay fig in the room? Yeah, a few people familiar with the Moreton Bay fig. So we use that as a bit of an analogy because the Moreton Bay fig is a beautiful tree, but it often starts life as a seed that a bird drops in the canopy of another tree. And happened actually in our home, and we were faced with the choice, well, do we get arborists in to get rid of this seed that started growing up in the top of this tree, because eventually it's going to destroy the tree? Or do we leave it in? Because you really do have those two choices. If you get rid of it, you preserve your existing tree until the next seed gets dropped in and starts to create roots. Or you can actually let these things grow. And what happens is they just gradually drop roots down to the ground, and they use the tree as a bit of a host, and they take off, and that tree in its own right becomes a bigger, stronger tree than the host tree. And they turn into beautiful trees, and you can have a beautiful Moreton Bay fig, in your garden. And that's the sort of transformation that we're talking about may happen if you're prepared to entertain and work with some of these seeds of ideas that others have out there.
It's also about not one change. So one of the things that I think can create a problem is if you just focus on an innovation stream, the rest of your organisation will resent that. Why aren't I in that bit? Why do I have to work this way and everyone else gets to, those guys are special, well, let's show them. And it was quite an astonishing thing from the start of the time I worked at Telstra until the end of the time I worked at Telstra. Usually you go through a process where you increasingly dislike the organisation you work at until you leave. I grew to actually increasingly like it to the point that I left. And I'm certain there'd be a resonance with most of the people in this room that dealing with Telstra today is a much better circumstance than it used to be. And that you get treated like an individual. You get, there is a concern for you and what your problem is, and that was a cultural change. And that change was an incredibly expensive exercise for the company to go through. The previous CEO, David Thodey, who's just departing CEO, David Thodey, literally got every single person manager in the entire country. They hired 2 floors at Darling Park. They went on a multi-year cultural re-engagement process where every single person went through, and one of the, directly under the CEO is a layer of management called the group managing directors or the group executives. Every single session was personally attended by one of those direct reports to the CEO, which, considering how deep Telstra is as an organisation, is a massive investment of their time. They ran these sessions, and every single person manager attended. I sat next to people from the Northern Territory and WA and people who ran lines out in the bush, and it was an amazing process to go through. But it's about taking everyone on the journey. There was another time that in the Melbourne Exhibition Centre, I looked back and literally the entertainment centre was full. And I looked at this, thousands and thousands of people, and it hit me. Every one of these people sitting in a seat manages people. And this is just one division of the company. You have to take everybody with you. And if you don't, it won't work.
It's interesting. So there's a big, I'm sure most people are aware, Westpac's got one of the buildings in Barangaroo, not the casino. It's the one in the middle. So we'll move in before the actual building's finished, I think towards the end of this year. And I actually partook in I don't know what you call it, psychology session, I guess you'd say, yesterday around personal resilience and how to deal with change. And they actually got into the psychology of change and how people, resort back to their primitive sense when they fear. And when they fear, they can't actually think. And so they're actually rolling this program out across the entire company. So that's 40,000, well, not 40,000. There's probably about 15 to 20,000 in head office that will be affected in some way by this change. And it's because we're literally going from myself having a desk in a corner, looking out a window that has my name tag against it, to I'm now going to end up in a neighborhood. And depending on what time I rock into the office, I may or may not get a seat. So yeah, it's quite a different shift. And they're cognizant of the fact that that potentially could have a massive impact on productivity within the organization. But the thing that I like about it is it's also making people more susceptible to change. And personally, I like to consider myself as a change agent no matter what the hell I'm doing. So it makes influencing much easier when you're not getting that resistance straight away to say, something different, this is bad, I'm going to hurt myself or something. Whereas if they're building this culture of change is okay, change is good, but change is unique and different to each individual. So this is how you may, they're equipping everyone individually with ways that they may be able to cope with change. So I think that sort of cultural shift, I haven't seen that approach before. Like when I was at IBM, the exec program they dealt with it, but again, it was like the top 5% of the organization, and that's not really where you want to be doing it. You want to be doing it across the board, as Dale's saying, otherwise you build resentment. So yeah, I think the bank in the next 12 months will be changed significantly because we'll be in a shiny new spire against the water, but the way that we actually work and the people themselves are going to be changed quite significantly.
Excellent. What we might do now is just switch it over a little bit. These sessions right after lunch can be a bit tough, so what we planned is to have a little bit of an interactive session. So what we're going to do is to get the panellists to split up. I think what we'll probably do is form 5 groups just by, if the tables can just join up this way. We'll distribute the panellists. But what we'd like to do is just have say a 20-minute discussion amongst the groups, make it more interactive to share your experiences, perhaps with some of the panellists and the other audience here. But what we'd like you to think about is just, what's your context? What are your innovation needs or desires? What's sort of the risk appetite and some of the risk barriers that you're perhaps up against? And what are some of those perhaps cultural things that need to change, and where might that start within the organisation? So we've got a little bit of a template that might help you think about some of those, but let's use that opportunity to share your experiences perhaps with others here, and perhaps that gives you a bit of a breather as well after lunch and then we'll recap after that to perhaps consolidate some of those ideas that you perhaps discussed amongst the audience. So would you guys mind if we just go, there's 5 sort of double tables here, just plant yourself in the middle there and we can join in around them. Okay, we might wrap things up there and get the panellists back up on the stage perhaps, and then we can perhaps field some final questions and comments. And yeah, I knew you would try me on, Mark, by sitting in a different seat to just check whether I'd get the name sorted out.
4 and then IBM for
Just
8.
keep the board one at the end,
Had
it'd be
fun.
fine.
Okay.
So
What we might do is just perhaps ask the panellists to just discuss whether there were some core themes coming out of their table that, and just contrast that perhaps with the other tables. So John, maybe...
Yep. So I'd like to thank my innovation self-help group this afternoon. We mostly sort of had a discussion, and Ian, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, about Australia, whether we've got a culture of not wanting to succeed so much, and a culture of not wanting to fail either. We're sort of caught somewhere in between. If you succeed too much, you're a tall poppy, and if you don't want to sort of be seen to fail, and whether that has an impact on the overall essence of innovation in Australia and feeds into everything else that we talked about earlier.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, it's a question for you.
Look, it's hard for me to comment. I mean, I only know what I know. So I've spent a bit of time overseas. Are we more or less innovative? I mean, there are some brilliant companies coming out of Australia. I mean, let's not forget that. I mean, the Atlassians and 99 Designs and Oz4Xs are truly exceptional companies, and they didn't exist 10 years ago. So let's not beat ourselves up too much. Maybe we're not as good at it as we could be. I think that's certainly true, and but I don't think it's an ingrained cultural problem. I mean, you look around Sydney and Melbourne in particular. I mean, it's a fairly immigrant culture, and we do want to succeed, and we do want to punch above our weight. And I don't notice too much of the tall poppy syndrome around the places I stomp, but where I'm seeing is that after the entrepreneurs have come through, or we're actually in those pockets of innovation anyway. So I'm not sure I agree.
Yeah. So do you think Australia perhaps has that, embraces that fail fast culture that now is being discussed a lot, or is it still seen as, perhaps embarrassing and not the path to success?
I think we collectively had concerns about whether there was an attitude towards doing that, and we're also talking about the idea, Dale, of sort of bringing everybody with you on the innovation journey, and whether that was true in all cases, or whether there are just some people that you should give people the opportunity, but not try and drag people along because they'll just go, "Change is great, you go first."
No, absolutely, and in fact, I mean, the beauty of the Telstra process that it really was genuinely inclusive, but then also highlighted the people who had to go, and then they went.
Okay, Mark, your table, any?
Yeah, our conversation was a little bit like, chicken and egg kind of conversation, which is there's a lot of great innovation and startups around our table, finding it difficult to get into big business because there's a low appetite for risk in big business, and there's the old phrase that was brought up, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, and that prevails in a lot of situations. So we had conversations about that, and we kind of talked about, maybe some startups are not to blame, but in a situation where they've actually spent all their time developing a great product, and when the product's ready, then they start the sales process and realize how difficult it is to get in and talk to some of the big organizations. So we talked a bit more about how maybe there's an agile approach even to that, which is right from get-go, get involved with some of your target companies in some way, so that you develop that relationship. You're asking them for input into what you're doing, not trying to keep secret necessarily what you're doing, but actually involving them in it, so that there's a real appetite by the end of it for what you have done.
Right, yeah. That get out of the building mentality almost of getting to your customer base or getting to the enterprise partner. Yeah. Now, Ian and Adam, you guys tag team the big table that sort of had the mega merge.
Yeah. I think our conversation was sort of similar along the lines of ours was predominantly startups, bar 2 or 3 people. So a lot of the conversation was sort of how does a startup become attractive to a large enterprise in a sense. And I guess the thing that I said to the team was, if you look at a large enterprise, that there is the entity that is the large enterprise, but fundamentally there's people that make up it. As they always say, people is the business, people is the culture. And I said, if you look at it, don't try and sell to Westpac. Try and actually look at individuals that you may know, or that know someone that you know, and reach in based on a relationship, and try and appeal to them based on that line, rather than trying to sell to Westpac. Because if you try and sell to Westpac, you'll basically get given the usual rigmarole of, here's the procurement number, are you on the panel, are you turning over $20 million a year, have you blah, 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 and you might as well be applying for a loan. So yeah, but something that I was sort of suggesting is try and actually go in via the relationship angle. Anything else?
No further comments. That's true.
Okay. Dale?
So the conversation on our table was fairly specific, and we were talking about, really the state of the ecosystem through a few phases. And so Kevin was sort of asking about how do we actually get past the point at which we've invented the idea and got the product and go to the next stage. And I think that the way that I was relaying it is we need to understand the thought processes of people who are investors in this country might be a little bit different. The risk appetites might be a little bit different. And even for angels, you need the company to be, and the structure to be there to be investable. So there has to be a certain, probably potentially more work done up front, which I know that good accelerators are putting into these organisations so that they become, certainly as innovators, they don't have to worry about, oh, what should a shareholders agreement look like? How should I do this stuff? That can kind of almost be templated so that by the time they get past the point at which their idea is solid, they're investable. And then the question came to, well, investable from where? I think with, the thing of should we go offshore? And I said, well, my answer was probably, well, China. China's probably the best source of investment capital right now if you're not looking in Australia. Meridee's last batch of companies went to China, and I think that in the model of iterating and learning, as Mick says, they went to Silicon Valley the year before. I'd say that was a flern. It wasn't that it was necessarily bad, it's just that it is an industry of startup business. Whereas in China it was more people who said, I have money, I would like to invest in a business I believe in. And two of the companies have substantial investments, and one, Triple Local, actually has closed its round, 700K out of China.
Interesting. Okay, well, time's ticking on us, and I know the next Vivid event's going to bump in here at 4. We have to be out. But I'd just like to finish off with that one last final comment from you guys. So what's that nugget of advice that you've got from today that you would either tell the enterprise CEO or C-level person about what they need to do to be more innovative in their environment and to be more competitive, or that nugget of advice to the startup who perhaps has to scale to be taken more seriously at the enterprise level in how they innovate and how they manage risk and quality. So from the overall discussions today, what's your final key message that you'd like to share with the audience? John, maybe we kick off with you.
I've been thinking more about when is the right time to introduce the enterprise to people like yourselves, because I mostly work with companies earlier in the journey. And it just sort of got me thinking today from talking to everyone about when is that the right time without scaring the pants off everybody and sending a bunch of people in skinny jeans and funny haircuts in to talk to them and actually be able to have a serious conversation. So rather than a statement, more of a question. Where do you look from your investment side the right time for a bigger company to meet smaller companies without it all getting messy and...
You mean for the bigger company to invest?
Yeah. So when's the right time to sort of say, look, you really should start talking to some of these people. You may learn some things. You may see an opportunity to invest, to cut your own throat. Sort of any of the.
For a corporate to invest is so far away from where just about every corporate is. I mean, I think that's hopefully we can have an event around that topic in 2 or 3 years. But I mean, I was amazed when Telstra, no offence to Telstra, Dale, but when Telstra pulled off Murudi as well as it did, I think thanks to you as a gatekeeper, you were like, the goalie.
Than me,
yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, and I haven't actually seen another good example of that in Australia. I mean, I think there's some trying to do it, so I think the question's better asked in a couple of years. And maybe I'll just keep going with that. I mean, in fact, no, I won't. I'll make sure no one else covers my point. So.
No, I think we'll go with you, Ian. You can kick off your key nugget now. We won't let you off the hook.
Okay. So, look, corporates are not startups, and they never will be startups.
Yep.
And for a corporate to turn around, read the lean startup book, and think that they're going to suddenly overnight transform into that, it's bonkers. So that's not going to happen. So, but what can corporates do to think more like startups, to behave more innovatively? And it is extraordinarily difficult. I mean, there's no getting around it. I mean, you are dealing with turning the Titanic, really. And a lot of it, we've got this concept of lean enterprise that we've given to, the talk. So, I mean, we don't, at AWS, we don't tend to lead with, here's the product and here's how to use it better. It's like, have you thought about transforming yourself in a fundamental way? Because what cascades out of that is that ability to iterate more quickly and to have smaller teams and try more projects and, you know, fail fast. And don't be scared of failing. I mean, there's a, you know, go back to that risk thing. It's like if you're in a corporate, it's actually quite scary if you get it wrong. And that, you know, that's one of the key things. It's like, don't make it a gun to your head if you're going to be in one of these projects that might fail. You know, so expose your corporates to, you know, like AWS and many of the banks and things are now involved in a new fintech co-working space called Stone and Chalk, which is getting kicked off. And, you know, they've also got Tyro as another fintech hub. So you're getting these clusters of great startups that are going to be emerging around a specific topic. So, I mean, Stone and Chalk will be a good one. And, you know, I'm going to be encouraging a lot of the corporates we're talking to, why don't you put your senior staff through there almost as a glorified internship? It's like, you know, so the startups might get 200 grand plus a year, you know, project manager or accountant or lawyer, whatever it is, you know, someone who can learn from them, and they're, oh my God, we've got to iterate and try different things all the time. But they'll also learn from them because they'll get that corporate advice. And, you know, is that going to be a charge for thing? I don't know. But just, you've got to sort of, if you've got a cauldron here and you've got to mix the pot.
Yeah, good point.
That's exactly, you know, the point that I would leave people with too, which is start working in these spaces together. There are more and more of these accelerators getting set up in different verticals, not just the finance industry with this fintech hub, but there's, you know, also starting logistics and in travel industries. These are getting set up now. So seek those out if you're a startup. And if you're a big business, you should be thinking about setting up those very hubs, working with either peers in your industry or setting up those spaces. And I'd, rather than the sort of backstreet knifing analogy, I prefer my Moreton Bay fig analogy.
I'm Scottish.
Yeah, I know. You're not from Glasgow, are you? But I'd encourage people to, you know, you know, the big industry out there thinking you're not going to change from an oak tree into a fig tree just by sheer willpower. You need to invite in seeds of change and get involved in that and let some of those grow.
Interesting. I mean, leaping off that, I suppose my thing is more around empathy and the symbiotic relationship. So you talked to your fig analogy, which I thought was interesting. But that's almost the fig taking over the host. I think the thing that needs to sort of be is more, you know, if you see like a bronze whaler shark swimming through the ocean, it's got the little fish, you know, picking things off of it and keeping it rolling. I think if you start sort of thinking that way, it won't be so hard for the two of them to work together. And if you start empathizing a little bit so the startup understands that, yeah, it's frustrating, we take time to move because we are a large organization, but empathize with us on that. Vice versa, we've got to go the other way and realize that you guys are like sharks. If you don't move, you die. So, you know, we need to be conscious of the fact that we can't handcuff you. So I think there's if I gave it a bit of a theme, it's more that symbiotic sort of relationship of the startup helping the enterprise, but also what can the enterprise help? And I suppose that comes down to, you know, asking the question of what is it that you actually want from the enterprise? Is it money? Is it advice? Is it vested interest in a joint venture of some description?
So I think for enterprises, given that I've said I have a rather pessimistic view about internal innovation, is let 1,000 flowers bloom. And really just try to, you know, there are a lot of people, you know, inside large organisations, there are a lot of people with ideas that would love to be able to try them out. There needs to be a way for experimentation to occur, and that failure is part of the business model. If you think about the entertainment industry, most TV shows are flops, most songs that are released are flops, but people consider Rupert Murdoch to be a genius, right? But it's just that he is able to understand the arbitrage of failure and success, and that one failure should not, you know, or even 100 failures should not block a single mega success. You know, the largest, you know, grossing movies of all time, I think, are pretty much universally 20th Century Fox. So, you know, it's about understanding that, you know, sometimes you just got to place a lot of small bets so that you can allow them to flourish. From the startup side of it, it's about understanding the ecosystem they operate within, and that it's not just about a great idea, it's understanding that, okay, I need to work within an ecosystem and I need to understand risk. Large enterprises represent a lot of risk to a startup, I believe. the corporates all behave as though it's the startup that's risky, but actually it's the engagement. Betting your company, as Adam said earlier on, a single engagement with a corporation is almost doomed to failure. Even if I think they're the best thing since sliced bread, I've got to set my budgets 18 months in advance. So great, I'll start, you know, July 1, 2017, we're on. Do you have enough runway to get there? So, you know, they're the sorts of issues. You need to be viable before you rely on those, you know, big hitters to win for you. Those procurement processes will kill you. There's too many reasons. You've got to become viable. Once you're viable, you'll be investable and you'll be a, you know, good potential supplier.
That's excellent. Okay, well, I'm sorry to cut it off. As I mentioned, we must be out of this room by 4 o'clock with the next group coming in. But you know, it was certainly quite an intriguing conversation, and one that's made me think a lot about different engagements, both with startups and enterprises. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panellists and thank you. And my favourite quote of today was, yes, Ian, are you prepared to build a knife that cuts your own throat? I think that's my takeaway for today. Thanks very much.